When France collapsed in June 1940, the German Navy inherited something far more valuable than dockyards or coastal guns. They gained control of the entire northern French shoreline, a 600-mile stretch of coastline that pivoted the balance of naval warfare overnight. Almost immediately, the channel transformed from a protective moat for Britain into a hunting ground for Germany's Schnellboot. The fast attack craft Allied sailors came to fear under a simpler name, Eboats. Operating at more than 40 knots, these vessels used darkness, speed, and shock to rip into merchant convoys right within sight of Britain's coast. In the narrow waters between Dover and Calais, barely 20 miles wide, the channel became a nightly battlefield where visibility vanished. Radar was limited, and every convoy felt like a gamble against a hidden predator. The Royal Navy had no ready-made answer. Deploying destroyers into the shallow channel was dangerous. They were too large, too valuable, and too slow to respond to hit-and-run strikes. Minesweepers and patrol boats lacked speed, while corvettes were designed for the open Atlantic, not a knife fight in coastal waters. Britain was losing merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Each sinking meant lost supplies, lost materials, and lost lives. And each successful E-boat raid made the channel feel smaller and deadlier. But the crisis wasn't just tactical. It was economic. Germany could afford to build sophisticated diesel-driven E-boats that bristled with torpedoes and machine guns. Britain, fighting on nearly every front, needed a weapon that was fast, cheap, and replaceable. A vessel that could be built not in massive naval yards, but in dozens of small civilian boat shops, the same places that once crafted yachts for wealthy clients. That solution already existed, just not in the Royal Navy's imagination. Vosper and British Power Boat Company had been designing fast wooden craft since the mid-1930s, experimenting with lightweight planing hulls and powerful aero engines. Their prototypes, dismissed in peacetime as little more than glorified racing boats, were about to become the backbone of Britain's coastal war. And as Germany pushed deeper into the Channel, the Admiralty realized they needed these boats immediately, setting the stage for a transformation that would turn the Channel into a trap instead of a hunting ground. The boats Britain turned to were the Motor Torpedo Boats, MTBs, vessels that looked fragile on paper but proved lethal in the Channel's confined darkness. Unlike Germany's sleek, diesel-powered E-boats, Britain's MTBs were built from plywood, mahogany planking, and glue. Their hulls flexed over waves, their frames vibrated under throttle, and their engines drank high-octane petrol that turned every hit into a potential fireball. Critics inside the Admiralty called them toys, unsuitable for war. But speed was a weapon, and MTBs offered it in abundance. Powered by aircraft-derived engines producing thousands of horsepower, MTBs could hit 40 to 45 knots, just enough to challenge the E-boat's advantages. And more importantly, they could be produced rapidly and cheaply. While a single German E-boat cost around £40,000 and required specialized shipyards, an MTB could be built for roughly three-quarters of that cost using dispersed civilian workshops. Vosper, Thornycroft, and British Power Boat Company perfected an assembly rhythm. Skilled carpenters fashioned hulls in weeks, engines were fitted in days, and entire flotillas could be commissioned in just 2 months. In a war where time mattered more than theory, the MTBs existed because Britain needed quantity now, not perfection later. The tactical shift came quietly. Instead of sending lone patrols against E-boat intruders, Britain organized MTB flotillas, 6 to 8 boats working as a coordinated pack. They patrolled shallow waters where larger warships hesitated to operate, using their small silhouettes to blend into darkness. On silent auxiliary engines, an MTB could drift like a shadow until a target was within torpedo range. Then, with throttles slammed open, the boats surged forward, unleashing torpedoes at point-blank distances before vanishing behind smoke screens. This doctrine mirrored Germany's own tactics, but with a key difference. MTBs could be everywhere at once. Their production volume meant Britain could flood the Channel with fast craft, covering more lanes, more choke points, and more convoy routes than Germany could ever hope to contest. Every night, the odds tilted further in Britain's favor. As MTBs multiplied and spread across the Channel, the hunting ground that E-boats once dominated began to shift, and it was only a matter of time before the trap snapped shut. By 1942, the Channel was no longer the unchallenged corridor for German night raiders. The surge in MTB numbers created something the E-boat crews had not faced before: density. Where once a German flotilla might cross from Cherbourg to intercept a convoy without encountering resistance, now almost every sortie risked detection. The channel's narrow geometry turned against them. With Britain positioning MTB flotillas at Dover, Ramsgate, Felixstowe, Yarmouth, and Portsmouth, the fast craft became a web stretched across vital approaches. The E-boats were still individually superior. Diesel engines gave them better range, round-bottom hulls let them maintain speed in rough weather, and the boats carried heavier guns. But superiority means little when meeting resistance became unavoidable. The battles that followed were chaotic, violent, and fought at point-blank ranges. Radar detection was limited, searchlights were unreliable, and gunfire often began only when silhouettes appeared suddenly out of darkness. E-boats relied on shock attacks, firing torpedoes before defenders could react. MTBs countered by running silent, then erupting into full speed at precisely the moment when a German boat's attack run exposed it. What developed was a high-speed chess match, but one where Germany was increasingly outnumbered. British MTBs never needed to outdesign the E-boats. They simply needed to outpresence them. For every E-boat Germany deployed, Britain could field multiple MTBs, each one representing a potential torpedo threat or gun flare in the night. German commanders complained in internal reports that the operational freedom once enjoyed is no longer present. Every track they plotted risked interception. Every return to port risked ambush. And every loss hurt them disproportionately. An E-boat sinking meant months of replacement time. An MTB sinking meant a new hull could be laid down within days in any one of dozens of small British yards. Yet the conflict remained undecided. For every intercepted attack, another E-boat managed to slip through cracks and strike a convoy. The channel became a place where neither side truly dominated, and the balance teetered on a knife edge. What ultimately tipped it wasn't tactics or technology. It was an event that exposed how deadly E-boats still were when circumstances aligned perfectly. And that moment arrived in the spring of 1944, during the rehearsal for the most important invasion of the war. In April 1944, the uneasy equilibrium between Britain's expanding coastal forces and Germany's shrinking E-boat arm was shattered in a single night. Operation Tiger, a massive rehearsal for the Normandy landings, sent 8 American LSTs through Lyme Bay under the assumption that the channel approaches were secure. They were not. A combination of radio errors, delayed escorts, and faulty coordination created a deadly gap in protection. And in that gap waited the very threat the Allies had worked for years to contain. 9 German E-boats from Cherbourg slipped past British patrol lines under cover of darkness, exploiting a momentary thinning of MTB presence. Whether through luck, timing, or the narrowest tactical window, they found the convoy just after 1:30 a.m. The LSTs, large and slow-moving, were traveling in a near-straight formation, a torpedo shooter's dream. The attack was fast, precise, and devastating. LST 507 erupted into fire, LST 531 sank within minutes, and LST 289 barely survived with its stern blown apart. In total, 749 American servicemen were killed, many trapped in burning seas or pulled down with the sinking vessels. For Allied commanders, the shock was immediate and severe. The incident was classified to protect D-Day secrecy, but its implications could not be ignored. It proved that despite Britain's numerical advantage and the constant nightly pressure from MTB flotillas, E-boats remained a lethal force when allowed space to operate. It also exposed weaknesses in patrol coordination and escort assignment, weaknesses that could not be permitted in the weeks before the Normandy invasion. The response was decisive. Allied air and naval forces initiated a systematic campaign to eliminate E-boat bases along the French coast. RAF Bomber Command targeted Cherbourg, Boulogne, Le Havre, and other launch points with tallboy and high-capacity bombs designed to collapse pens and destroy boats in port. Meanwhile, MTB flotillas tightened their patrol lines, sealing off escape routes and increasing the likelihood of interception. The message was clear. The channel would no longer permit another exercise Tiger. But the transformation was not complete. Eliminating the E-boat threat required not just tactical tightening, but overwhelming force, something Britain was finally positioned to apply. And that force arrived in the weeks immediately after D-Day, when the Channel turned decisively against Germany's remaining fast attack craft. After the devastation of Exercise Tiger, the Allies approached the Channel with a new doctrine. The E-boats had to be neutralized at their source. Tactical interception by MTBs was no longer enough. The threat required strategic suffocation. And by June 1944, the combined strength of British shipyards, coastal forces, and RAF Bomber Command created the conditions for precisely that. While MTBs continued their nightly patrols, weaving a dense net across the approaches to Normandy, heavy bombers targeted the German fast attack arm where it was most vulnerable, its bases. On June 14th, just 8 days after the landings at Normandy, RAF Lancasters dropped 12,000-pound tallboy bombs on the E-boat facilities at Le Havre. These strikes were not symbolic. They were calculated, structural attacks intended to collapse reinforced pens, destroy repair shops, and incinerate vessels still on their cradles. At least a dozen E-boats were destroyed outright, with several others severely damaged. For a class of vessel that required specialized hull construction, precision-engineered diesel engines, and lengthy fitting-out periods, such losses were crippling. The Kriegsmarine's war diary noted the event with unusual bluntness, recommending that the Führer be personally informed of the disaster. Meanwhile, Britain's MTBs tightened their grip on the Channel. What had once been contested waters were now patrolled by hundreds of fast craft, supported by motor gunboats and destroyers when needed. Germany attempted to reinforce its surviving flotillas, but every transit was hazardous, every sortie a gamble. By D-Day, only 34 operational E-boats remained in the Channel, against a British force numbering in the hundreds. The numerical imbalance that had been building for years finally manifested in complete operational dominance. The E-boats, once predators, became hunted animals. Every attempt to strike at Allied convoys was met with overwhelming pursuit. Every withdrawal back to port risked interception or preemptive bombing. Losses became irreplaceable. The Channel, once a place where Germany wielded speed and surprise as weapons, had turned into a confined arena where even small mistakes proved fatal. But the final blow to the E-boat campaign didn't come from a single strike or battle. It came from an industrial reality Germany could no longer escape, a reality that would define the remainder of the war in the Channel. Germany's fast attack craft had once embodied the precision and engineering pride of the Kriegsmarine. Their diesel engines were reliable, their hulls were robust, and their crews were among the most highly trained naval personnel in the Reich. But by late 1944, none of those advantages could compensate for the strategic imbalance that now defined the Channel. Britain's MTBs were not individually superior, yet they were numerous, expendable, and supported by an industrial base capable of replacing losses faster than Germany could register them. Every new MTB that left a British workshop added to the density of patrols. Every E-boat lost represented a penalty Germany could no longer afford. German shipyards, strained by multiple theaters of war, faced bottlenecks in skilled labor, diesel engine output, and material shortages. Specialized yards at Bremen and other ports could produce perhaps a dozen boats monthly under ideal conditions, conditions that no longer existed once RAF bombers made these facilities primary targets. The E-boat fleet steadily shrank, not through dramatic battles, but through attrition accelerated by disrupted supply chains and overwhelming Allied presence. Britain, by contrast, distributed MTB construction across civilian yards, turning yacht builders, carpentry shops, and small boat works into an improvised naval production line. The result was a stream of fast craft that Germany simply could not match. At sea, the consequences were decisive. MTBs intercepted E-boats before they could reach convoys, chased them down during withdrawal, and harassed their coastal traffic. Motor gunboats provided heavier firepower when needed, further tightening the trap. By 1945, the Channel no longer belonged to the night raiders who once launched torpedoes within sight of England's shores. It belonged to the flotillas that Britain had built quickly, cheaply, and in overwhelming numbers. The Channel War proved a lesson repeated throughout military history. Sophisticated weapons win battles, but available weapons win campaigns. The E-boats remained impressive examples of marine engineering. The MTBs, however, represented a different kind of strength, industrial pragmatism, operational flexibility, and numerical dominance. In the confined, unpredictable waters of the Channel, that combination turned Britain's fast wooden craft into the defining force of coastal warfare, transforming a once vulnerable passage into a deadly trap Germany could no longer escape. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story from the hidden battles of history.